Hello, Uniteds, Mr. CHEN-KE here. Just thought I'd make a video walking you guys through what we covered today on mise-en-scene. Now, it's such a complicated topic, and there was lots of content that I gave you guys today that it might have felt for some of you guys as a bit of an information overload. So hopefully this video helps you revise what you learned today about mise-en-scene, but also to consolidate your learning and your knowledge on mise-en-scene and film analysis in general. Not gonna lie, usually I say these videos are going to be short, like 15, 20 minutes. This one might be quite long. I don't know how long it's going to be, but I can't guarantee that it will be very short. So I do apologize for the length of this video. It's just going to be quite long because mise-en-scene is such a layered and nuanced topic. Without further ado, so if we look back and we think back to what we did today, we covered the cinematic elements, or we learnt about the cinematic elements that make up mise-en-scene. And we have 6 key film techniques and elements that make up mise-en-scene, which we'll cover in a minute. We also analysed the impact of mise-en-scene in a still. I walked you through an analysis of 2 stills from the Truman Show. So today we also define mise-en-scene, so you guys should have took some notes on what that is. We tried to identify elements of mise-en-scene within a couple of stills from the Truman Show, as well as from multiple other TV shows and movies. Last but not least, we talked a little bit about the meaning that's communicated through a film's mise-en-scene. Let's make a start though. So that's sort of revise what mise-en-scene is. So to give you guys a bit of an overview, and I'll just move my head up here. Translated from French, mise-en-scene literally means what's in the frame. Now remember, frame is a single image of film, also known as a still. So if you're watching a movie and you pressed pause and took a screenshot of that, that's what we consider a frame. So the words frame, still, screenshot are used interchangeably. I would prefer it if you use the terms frame or still, just because screenshot sounds a little bit informal. But when we are talking about film analysis orally, I don't mind whichever one of those 3 terms you use. But when you write formally, please use the terms frame or still. So when you're watching a film, everything that you see on the screen at any one time makes up the mise-en-scene. So in essence, mise-en-scene refers to everything, and I mean literally everything, that is placed in front of the camera, and how these elements are arranged deliberately to contribute to the visual presentation and overall look of a film. Now, it's really important to recognize and be conscious of the fact that everything you see on the screen has been placed there for a reason, and it has been positioned and arranged deliberately by the filmmaker. Films, just like books and short stories, are all consciously constructed. They've been deliberately arranged and constructed to convey a certain message or a certain meaning. Okay, now when we think about and describe what makes up a film's mise-en-scene, we normally refer to these 6 main categories. Production design, lighting, color, camera shots and angles, composition and framing, and facial expressions and body language. Lighting, color, camera shots or shot sizes and angles are things that you should be quite familiar with because we've covered those key film techniques in the last fortnight. Whereas production design, composition and framing, facial expressions and body language, that might be a little bit new or foreign to you guys. So as you're watching this video, you may want to pause as I'm going through those specific elements, or any of the elements for that matter, and take a few more detailed notes or add to the notes that you took today. Okie dokie. Production design is an umbrella term that covers every element to a film's look. This includes the sets and locations, the decor, the props, the characters' costumes, and the makeup. So we'll start off with location. Now, the location of the scene refers to literally the physical space in which the scene unfolds. And it's important because the location sets the mood and also supports the action. Set design refers to everything the audience sees within a particular scene. These details help flesh out the world of the location and also add a bit of context to the story as well. Decor refers to the furniture or the decoration of a certain scene. Props are objects that actors use on the screen. And finally, costume, hair, makeup are quite self-explanatory, but oftentimes what characters wear, their hairstyle, and how they do themselves up reflects their personality, their status. So if you saw a man wearing a very nice tailored suit, you would probably reasonably assume that he's of quite wealthy status. Same with a woman, if you saw them wearing a very, very nice outfit. But it can also be used to emphasize themes. So if I put a character in front of you that was dressed in very high-end haute couture, high-end fashion, and then I juxtapose that with another character that was dressed in ragged, dusty old clothes, then perhaps one of the themes the movie is touching upon is this idea of social economic status and the class divide. Now, costume, hair, and makeup can also establish the time period that the film is set in. So that's quite important to consider as well. Okay, here's some examples. So this is a still from the TV show Normal People, which is based on a brilliant book written by Sally Rooney, who's an Irish author. Now, if we analyze this still, looking at the key elements of mise-en-scene, there are a few things that we can pick up on in terms of visual meaning. So let's look at costume first. Now you'll notice that all the characters, all the subjects sitting in this still or in this scene seem to be wearing some kind of uniform. You've got both the boys and girls wearing grey button-up shirts, kind of yellow and black ties, and you've also got this bluish teal sweater. Now, because they're all wearing the same thing, we can assume that's probably some kind of uniform. So we can infer or reasonably assume or guess that these people or these subjects in the frame are students. Now, let's look at the set design. So everything that we can actually see within this frame. Now, I can see a lot of students who are seated in rows, and I can also see that they've got some sort of booklet and a pen and paper on their desks. Now, we can probably reasonably assume that these students are maybe doing an exam, and because of the way that they don't look like they're very, very young. They look quite old, maybe they're year 11s or year 12s. We could maybe assume that through this still, the exam that they're doing might be their final year English exam or something like that. Regardless, this exam seems quite high stakes. In terms of location, I can see a basketball court, basketball board with a hoop sort of embedded to the back of this building that they're in. And I can see the smooth wooden floors, which seem to have some kind of lines or markers on them. So one can reasonably assume that this might be a group of year 11 and year 12 senior school students doing one of their important exams, sitting the final exam, I should say, in perhaps their school gymnasium or their school hall. So the elements of mise-en-scene that make up production design, the costumes, the set design, the location, these are very small details that when put together help us establish or derive meaning from a still like this one. Also consider this photograph taken of one of the classrooms in Hogwarts from the Harry Potter series. Now notice that you've got these interesting, like, I guess they're cauldrons or pots on the table. Now, these aren't the standard Bunsen burners and beakers that we're used to in our science classrooms. They look much more medieval and fantastical. You've got bottles of potions and what seems like magical herbs and who knows, all these mystical things on the shelves behind us. And the decor, the furniture and the actual set, the classroom's walls even looks quite mystical and medieval and fantastical. So again, imagine if Harry Potter was set in the classroom that I'm in now. Imagine if all the wizards were just sitting on the tables and chairs that we would normally sit at a standard public school in Melbourne. It just would lose the entire effect of what makes the Harry Potter series so incredibly appealing. So again, set design really establishes mood. It gives the reader, or it helps create for the viewer, I should say, a more realistic and a more fantastical world. Okie dokie. We're not going to talk too much about lighting because we covered this a couple of weeks ago, but lighting is one of the key elements that makes up mise-en-scene. Lighting, we know, evokes mood and emotion in a film. Lighting also draws attention to specific subjects by illuminating them. And as we learned last week, lighting can be broadly divided into two categories: high key lighting and low key lighting. So with high key lighting, you've got this flat, even range of light. There's little to no shadows. It's usually bright and dominated by white tones. And usually when you have a scene or a still that's shot in highlight lighting, high key lighting, I should say, it's quite uplifting and there's very little dramatic effect. Oftentimes in romantic comedies and musicals, you will see high key lighting used. Now, on the flip side, we've got low key lighting, and this is where we have lots of shadows and notable contrasts between light and dark. It's dominated by dark, black tones, and normally filmmakers will use low key lighting to create drama. Now, we often see low key lighting in horror or thriller films. So another example from Harry Potter, we've got Dumbledore here, and this is an example of high key lighting. Notice that there are very little shadows in this still. Um, the color scheme is very much dominated by these bright white colors, and perhaps this connotes innocence or purity, and it almost makes Dumbledore seem like an angel in a way. So notice how high key lighting creates a very different mood compared to, say, low key lighting. Now, this is from Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. Now, remember, we analyzed this trailer and compared it to the Thor Ragnarok trailer a couple of weeks ago. Notice the contrast between dark and light. Also, notice that Superman is sort of shrouded in shadows, which is actually very odd because normally superheroes are portrayed by filmmakers in really high key lighting, bright, colorful colors, and that sort of makes them seem more heroic and positive, like they're saving us. Whereas this sort of low key, dark, gritty lighting makes Superman seem less of a superhero and more of an ominous figure. So again, we know that DC is quite famous for their gritty, dark, bleak portrayal of superheroes, whereas Marvel, say, who uses lots of high key lighting, have much more of a positive vibe in the way that they shoot their films. So again, lighting has a massive effect on our interpretation of the scene, as well as its visual meaning and mood. Color we looked at last week as well. Now we know color elicits emotions, establishes mood, and has a psychological effect on the viewer, I should say. And when analyzing color as part of mise-en-scene, it's important to consider the hue, so the color itself, saturation, how intense a color is, and obviously brightness, how bright a color is. It's also important to consider the connotations of colors as well. Really good way to sort of distinguish between colors is by looking at a color wheel. So I've got that on your screen right now. On the left-hand side, so your yellows, oranges, reds, and violets, that's what we call quite warm colors. And on the right-hand side, the greens, the blues, and indigos, that's what we call cool colors. So normally that connotes sort of calmness, but also sometimes isolation as well. So here's a scene from Spike Jonze's film Her. You actually might notice the actor in this scene. That's Joaquin Phoenix, who played Joker in last year's Joker remake. Now, Her is a film about a lonely man looking for love, and he actually finds love in artificial intelligence. So he falls in love with an AI. Now, we know that from the bright red or salmon colored button up shirt he's wearing, as well as the red app loading on his screen, we know that the color red often connotes love and passion and intimacy. So again, with a film about love or finding it, the color red seems quite apt and relevant. This is a still from arguably the most famous war film of all time, titled Saving Private Ryan. Now, notice the color scheme in this still, and notice the lighting as well. It's almost like the light has been completely drained from this image. In fact, the more you look at it, it almost seems black and white. Now, this is achieved by in post-production through a process called bleach bypass. And this is when you edit the color of an image and you essentially drain a still of its color. So again, this creates sort of a bleak, depressing, gritty vibe to your film. Okie dokie. We also learnt about camera shots or shot sizes and angles the other week. I'm not going to go through this in too much depth, But these shot sizes and camera angles contribute to mise-en-scene quite significantly. For example, when you have a high angle shot in a still, you could say that, well, normally high angle shots are used to show subjects and make them look vulnerable. Now, let's look at this picture of Captain America and Thor. They do look quite vulnerable. They look quite shocked and surprised and startled. Whereas a low angle shot, this is from The Matrix, makes figures seem quite menacing and powerful and even times threatening. Okie dokie. Composition and framing is the fifth element that makes up a film's mise-en-scene, and it's arguably the most important and also the most difficult to get your head around. So if you're going to pause at any stage during this video, I'd recommend pausing at this slide and really trying to get your head around composition and framing. So both terms are actually quite similar. In fact, when you read them, you're like, well, what's the difference? And I'll sort of tell you that in a minute. But let's sort of define them first. So composition refers to how the elements inside the frame are positioned and exhibited to the viewer. Now, in essence, composition is the skill of knowing what to show and how to show it. On the flip side, framing is simply the placement and position of subjects in a shot. Now, the key distinguishing factor between composition and framing is actually the second clause in the second sentence of the definition of composition. So composition not only refers to how elements such as actors and objects are positioned in the frame, but it actually has to do a lot more with what is shown in the frame as well as how it's shown. So what does the filmmaker deliberately show the viewer, us? And what do they deliberately leave out of a frame? And how do they do it? Whereas framing is simply the placement and positioning of subjects. Doesn't quite cover as much of detail as composition does. So composition can be thought of as framing, but also considering what to show and how to show it. So it's a bit more of a detailed definition or link to framing. So you'll need to know the next 6 factors when analyzing composition and framing. So depth of field, how much of an image is in focus? Size, so the size of something in a frame or in a still often reflects how important it is to the film. Relationships as well, so when we see more than one character in a shot, we are meant to acknowledge their relationship. Now, they might be quite close, they might be intimate, they might be romantic partners, but their relationship could also be quite contentious. They might be mortal enemies. When analyzing framing, we also need to consider balance. So a balanced image or a balanced frame is when there are elements on both the left and the right side of a frame. Height and angle of the camera in relation to the subject being filmed is also quite important to consider. And last but not least, loose versus tight framing. So are the subjects placed in an open space in the still, or are they kind of quite compressed in sort of an small space and they don't have much room to move around? Now, all of those concepts, when you just read the definition, seem quite abstract. So let me give you some concrete examples. This is a wonderful image or photograph that illustrates depth of field and focus really well. So on the left-hand side, you'll notice that only the tree twig or the branch is really in focus. The rest of the image is very blurry. Now, we call that shallow depth of field because there's a small area that's in focus and a large area that's out of focus, blurry. On the right-hand side, we describe this image as having a slightly deeper depth of field. Now, obviously, the focus is still primarily on that tree twig, but we see much more of the background. It's not as blurry as the image on the left. So that's what we call a deeper depth of field. In a sense, we can see a little bit more, and the focus area of the photograph is a little bit larger. Another example of mise-en-scene has to do with the size of certain objects in the frame. Now, this is a still from the film The King's Speech, which is about a leader who struggles with public speaking. He has real anxiety and fear of getting up in front of his nation and speaking, which, as you might have guessed, is a very, very inopportune inopportune element to have, because if you're a world leader, you need to be able to speak publicly. Now, in this image, notice the size of the mic that he's speaking into. Now, this is one of those old-fashioned mics. The mic is pretty much bigger than his head. In fact, it covers part of his face. So the size of objects in the frame contribute to the visual meaning. The mic sort of covering half of his face might symbolically represent or metaphorically represent the absolute fear and anxiety and apprehension that this character has in regards to public speaking. The general rule of thumb, the larger that a character seems in a film or appears in a frame, or the larger that the largest object in a frame, I should say, usually means it's more important. Okay, let's look at how relationships are established by framing and composition. So in this image, you see Killmonger and T'Challa from the Black Panther film in focus. They're the two main actors that we are drawn to. Now, in the background, you do see T'Challa's guards or the Wakandian military, a couple of those warriors, but they're blurry. They're not in focus. So you perhaps describe this shot as having quite a shallow depth of field. Now, notice their facial expressions. Let's bring in some of the other mise-en-scene elements to analyze this still. Killmonger and T'Challa both appear to be staring each other down. Now, this is probably not how two best friends look at each other, at least most of the time. So we can assume from this still that these two might have quite a conflicted, antagonistic relationship with each other. So again, the way that characters are placed in a film, composition and framing, is very, very important. The way that T'Challa and Killmonger have been placed in this still shows that they're divided. They represent two completely different worlds. One represents evil, one represents good. And again, that really contributes to the visual meaning that we as an audience decipher from reading, or from viewing, I should say, a movie. This is an example of loose framing. Notice that Ryan Gosling's character from Blade Runner is placed in the center of the frame, and around him there is nothing. It's just open space. Loose framing refers to when you place a character in quite an open area. So that sort of symbolizes the vastness of the desert that he seems to be in. It also symbolizes and speaks to his loneliness. There's no one else, no other signs of life. It's just him. So consider the metaphoric and symbolic meanings that these mise-en-scene elements sort of relate to. In contrast, here's Ryan Gosling, same actor as in the previous frame, but in a different movie titled Drive. And this movie is mostly set in or shot in cars. Now notice how tight the framing is in this image. We don't have much open space. Ryan Gosling's character is framed or placed at the very edge of the frame. And even though there's some space on the other side of the frame, there's not actually a lot of physical space for him to move. I mean, he's sitting in a car. In cars, you don't have a lot of space to move at all. One of my students today, Jonathan, in one of my Year 9 classes, so shout out to you, Jonathan, because this was a great pickup, said in most forms of transport, not just cars, when you're sitting on a really cramped plane, when you're sitting on a train, a tram, a bus, you don't have a lot of room to move around. So oftentimes, directors and filmmakers will use tight framing to represent or speak to a character's sort of feeling of being trapped. They don't have that much room to actually move around. Okie dokie. Last but not least, one of the key elements of mise-en-scene is facial expressions and body. So we know that facial expressions provide a clear indicator of how someone's feeling. If someone's smiling broadly, we assume that they're happy. However, we get a very different feeling if this person is smiling maniacally and there's scary horror music playing over that. Body language is also quite important because it also indicates how a character feels towards another character, and it can also say a little bit about that character's mental state. if your character's sort of confidently strutting around, you could probably assume or infer that they're quite confident. If they're sort of shoulder slouched, meandering around, you could probably say that their mental state isn't too good. They're probably slightly depressed or sad or dejected in a way. So a really good example of body language is exemplified through this still. This is again from the TV show Normal People. Notice that these two characters, Marianne and Connell, seem to be quite cozy with each other. They seem to be quite intimate. Marianne laying her head on Connell's shoulder indicates through her body language that they seem to be comfortable in each other's personal space. Now, this might mean that they're romantic partners. They might be boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, but it could also mean that they're very good friends. Body language is so vital because it gives us an idea about the relationships that these characters have with one another. Okay, that was an absolute mountain of information. So let's bring it all together. Why is mise-en-scene so important? Well, directors use mise-en-scene to tell a story. It also evokes a certain atmosphere. Think about lighting. When you have high-key lighting, it's usually a more positive atmosphere, whereas low-key lighting and very dark, cold colors, it gives off sort of a more depressing mood or bleak mood. Mise-en-scene is vital in giving information, also in provoking an emotional response. And also, mise-en-scene can be used to highlight key themes. Okay, so part 2, identifying mise-en-scene. We looked at this example today, but I thought I'd just walk you guys through it once more. So let's have a look at Truman's costume. Now we can see that he's dressed in quite a professional outfit. He's got a suit jacket, a nice yellow sweater, a button-up shirt and a tie, and he's also carrying a prop, a leather suitcase. So what can we infer? Well, he is probably a professional. He looks like a businessman, and just by the way that he's dressed, his costume, we can infer that he's got quite a good income. Now, that ring he's got on his ring finger is actually a symbol of college. In America, when you go to college, especially if you're a man and you join a fraternity, so like a society, you get a ring to sort of signify that you're part of this frat. Now, the fact that he's wearing one of these frat rings symbolizes that he's got a college education and he's well educated. Also notice the background. His house is in the background and it seems quite nice. You've got these beautiful white, creamy colors. His house is numbered 36, so you can assume that he lives on quite a long street. And for the most part, it looks like a double-story house and it looks like quite a comfortable dwelling. Also notice that Truman looks deceptively similar, and I'll just move my head aside, to the man in this advertisement from 1950s America. Now, in the 1950s, this is post-World War. So the World War ended in the mid-40s. So once all the soldiers came back and the economy started booming and getting back to normal, a lot of Americans started referring to this idea or the concept of the American dream. And essentially, the American dream was if you're a family, or especially if you're a man, you'd marry a woman, you'd buy a nice house, you'd live in the suburbs, and your house would be equipped with all these beautiful appliances like the latest fridge, the latest TV and radio. And the man was the primary breadwinner. He would be responsible for going out and earning money for the family. He'd normally have a couple of children. And at that time, the role of woman was actually quite restrictive. Women were often thought of as simply maids or house workers who were domesticated, and their only job was to do the housework and to rear or raise their children. So again, maybe through the way that this image has been constructed, in regards to Truman's costume, the prop that he's holding, the set design of his house. Perhaps Christoph in the Truman Show thinks that 1950s America was a true utopia, the perfect world that we all should be striving towards and we all should be living in. Let's look at this shot of Sea Haven. So this is an establishing shot. Again, for those who have forgotten, an establishing shot is normally shown at the start of a film or start of a new scene in a film, and it establishes the location, the geography, the time of day of a certain scene. So again, this establishing shot comes right after Truman has his conversation with Merrill about going to Fiji, and Merrill sort of shuts him down. Notice the set design here. All the houses look the same. They're very orderly. Now, again, this perhaps links to 1950s society, the American dream. This is perhaps Christoph's perception of what a utopia, the perfect world or perfect society would look like. Also notice that Sea Haven is literally surrounded by water. This is representative or symbolic of Truman's entrapment because of his fear of water. He cannot leave Sea Haven because he's petrified of water. So this again symbolizes his isolation. Also notice the fact that the bridge here symbolizes freedom. Like, well, you've got the opportunity to leave Sea Haven if you don't want to live here. But really, it's actually all an illusion. It's all a lie. Because this is a set, Christoph has built this set for this inhumane TV show, which houses Truman and all the other actors and extras. You can't actually leave Sea Haven. So again, this idea of entrapment. Last but not least, notice the colors. You've got the dull muted colors, which represent the time of day. Perhaps this is dawn, the start of a new day, or perhaps it's dusk, the end of a day when the sun's going down. Also notice the cool colors of the water, the blue, mixed with some warm colors, the reddish, amberish, orange, greenish tones of the flora and fauna surrounding Sea Haven. So there's a mixture of cool colors and warm colors. Okay, so what does this all mean? Now, when you're analyzing mise-en-scene, like I just did with you guys then, you only want to analyze the elements of the still that are relevant. Not all of these elements will be relevant. So, for example, framing, composition, location, setting, lighting, color, those are the three elements of mise-en-scene that we could spot in this still, so we can analyze them. But in terms of props, costumes, acting, body language, expression, none of those mise-en-scene elements were evident in that image. So you don't have to analyze it. So remember, mise-en-scene is made up of those 6 key categories, but you don't have to analyze all of them. That's a little bit too much work. You simply need to select the 6 elements of mise-en-scene that are most relevant to that still and analyze it based on those relevant elements. So, a really good way to begin analysis before you actually write a full essay is to sort of use these kinds of tables to scaffold or slowly build up your learning. So, when you analyze a still like this one of Sea Haven, you want to first identify the different types of mise-en-scene and the different elements that are used in this still or present in this still. But then you want to also think about what these elements of mise-en-scene tell us about the place, the characters, or the themes. So let me give you an example. Now, we know that one of the key elements of mise-en-scene is camera shots and composition. Now, what does that actually tell you about the place, the characters, and the themes? Well, for example, I've written there you've got an establishing shot. The framing shows the island of Sea Haven that's surrounded by water. There is a bridge for people to get off the island, but this is merely an illusion of freedom because water is used by Christoph as a deterrent to stop Truman from actually ever leaving Sea Haven. The establishing shot also shows us how vast, how large the set of the TV show actually is. We can see how much time, thinking, resources have actually gone into the creation of the show. In terms of location and setting, we sort of assume from that image, the establishing shot, that it's set in a dome. All the houses are similar and close together. It's relatively small for a community or a suburb, and it suggests that perhaps all the people know each other and there's a lack of individuality and difficult to have privacy. And again, it harks back to the idea of 1950s suburban America. When we identified lighting and color, we analyzed it, but now we have to think about how lighting and color affects the place, the characters, and the themes. So I've written that the dull muted colors are evident, and while it's representative of the time of day, it also suggests more than this. As the frame is being filled by mostly cool colors, it creates somewhat of an uneasy, sort of depressing feeling. Almost like it's artificial, it's not real. So, what's my overall interpretation of this still? Well, this still communicates a couple of things, in my opinion. It communicates Truman's captivity. He's forever trapped in this set that Christoph has built for him. It also communicates Christoph's sheer power. This is a guy that you shouldn't mess with. He has built one of the most advanced film sets in the entire world just to keep his show running and to keep Truman trapped. Just shows you the amount of power that Christoph and his team of production or producers have. And last but not least, what do I think all these elements of mise-en-scene are communicating about the film and meaning? Well, I think it also touches on the power of the media. Um, these large TV networks have so much money and so many resources to be able to build such an elaborate set. And to, again, broadcast that 24/7 to everyone that wants to watch it. I mean, it just shows you the absolute power and the grip that the media has over the entertainment industry, but also our consumption habits of what we watch. So definitely use a table like this to scaffold and slowly build up your ability to write an analysis of a still. Okay, part 3. You have done so well to sit through this. This is arguably, I think, no, not arguably, I think this is by far the longest Loom video that I've ever recorded for you guys. So here's what I want you guys to do in the next period. Now, for my 9G3 class, you guys would have already started on this, so you will get a little bit of time later on this week to actually flesh this out in more detail. For my 9E1ers, we've only had a single period instead of a double. You'll be able to begin this on Thursday. So I want you to select one of the following stills to analyze from the following slides. So this is one of the stills. You've got Truman sitting on the beach, looking very lonely, looking very sad, even though you can't see his facial expression. And you've got this final still to choose from. This is of Sylvia sitting in her house. This is just before she calls up Christoph to protest and plead for them to release Truman. So I want you to choose one of these stills to analyze. Once you've selected your still, you must make a copy of the photo and paste it in this worksheet. So when you click on this link, you'll be taken to a worksheet that looks like this. Okay, so I want you to literally choose one of these images, copy, and paste it into this document. Okie dokie. And then afterwards, I want you to analyze your chosen still using this table. So firstly, identify which elements of mise-en-scene are actually relevant to the still. Now remember, you don't have to analyze all 6 elements. Only analyze the elements of mise-en-scene that you feel like are relevant or shown through that image. Secondly, tell me what this still or how these different mise-en-scene elements are working together to communicate information about the place, the characters or the people, and also the theme of the film or the themes. Last but not least, give me your overall interpretation of this still. What is this still telling us about the characters, the setting, the themes of the piece? So that is your task for the rest of the week. Later on this week, probably on the Friday, we're actually going to look at a sample film analysis. I've actually written up a full essay analysis. We're going to look at it together, annotate it together, and then break down what's good about it and what's not so good. In terms of submitting this worksheet, hold tight. I will tell you where to submit it when I catch up with you guys on Wednesday or Thursday. Okie dokie. Thank you so much, Year 9s, for sitting through this video. I know this is by far the longest video that we've made, but because mise-en-scene is such a big concept, we did have to probably spend a little bit more time working our way through it. So you don't have to watch this entire video, only watch it if you want to revise and review certain aspects of mise-en-scene. Always remember though, mise-en-scene is made up of 6 key elements, which are listed on this slide. So we've got production design, lighting, color, camera shots and angles, composition and framing, as well as facial expressions and body language. But importantly, you don't just want to analyze mise-en-scene on a superficial level. It's great if you can find all these different elements in the images or the stills or screenshots that we give you, but you want to tell me in your analysis how mise-en-scene and all these different elements work together to communicate meaning about characters, about settings, and about themes as well. Okie dokie. Hope this video helps. Really good to see you guys. Final week of remote and online learning. I'll catch up with you guys later this week, but keep it up. One more week to go before we're finally back in class. All right, adios.